Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's event, The Story of Cantonese at Stanford. Big shout out and thank you to SAPAC for sponsoring this event. Kevin, would you like to say a little bit more about your organization?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Su. I'm a former president of SAPAC, the Stanford Asian Pacific American Alumni Club. We're really pleased and glad to be able to host this event today. We have some really great alumni speakers who are going to be talking about a very vital question that is in front of us right now. If you're interested in joining SAPAC, it is open to all Stanford alumni and also to current students, because once you've been at Stanford for 3 quarters, you qualify as an alumnus. And you can sign up at sapac.org, sapaac.org. We work in areas ranging from advocacy and education to hosting local events, both physically in wherever chapter you are or online as well. And it's called Asian Pacific American Alumni Club. But even if you're based in Asia, if you think of yourself as Asian, it's open to Asians and Asian Americans and Pacific Islander alumni. So we're really glad to be a family and also a voice for the API community at Stanford, and raising the spotlight, raising our voices to kind of let the university know about the issues we're interested in, and kind of building this community is our mission. And so that's why we're very glad to host the event with you today. And many thanks also to Emily, who was able to help us pull together this event, as well as to Lon, who also helped organize.
Awesome. We are so excited to have this public event. And it's not just Stanford folks who are in the room. As you can see from the chat, there are people from all over who are joining us today. I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we'll do a couple of polls just to see who all is in the room. But just to get us started, Dr. Gina Tam received her PhD in Chinese history from Stanford in 2016 and is an alum of the Stanford Cantonese program. She's currently an assistant professor at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. Her first book, Dialect and Nationalism in China from 1860 to 1960, traces the significance of local languages in China, including Cantonese, to the making of Chinese national identity. Thank you for joining us, Gina. Dr. Sik Lee Dennig, or who we know as Zheng Luosi, is a native of Hong Kong. She received her PhD in educational linguistics at Stanford in '92, and she has taught language and linguistic courses to students of different ages in Hong Kong, Japan, Canada, and the United States. At Stanford, she has taught Cantonese for over 20 years and done research on how heritage speakers maintain and develop Cantonese. Her teaching and research have highlighted the role of socio-political context and the interconnectedness between language and identity in heritage language learning. Thank you for joining us, Zheng Luosi. Finally, hello everyone, my name is Gina Tam. I'm an alum of Stanford's Cantonese program from the class of 2010, and also one of the leaders behind the campaign to save Cantonese at Stanford. I'm also the co-founder of an organization or a social media-based campaign called Black Lives Matter Cantonese, a language education initiative that aims to equip members of the Cantonese diaspora with language skills for conversations around racial justice. I'm currently an assistant professor of health policy at the Yale School of Public Health. So super excited to get us started. And I think since we're not all able to see you, and we have 118 attendees right now, we have a couple of polls. And if you would like to just sort of chime in and let us know where you're joining us from, so we have a sense of who all is in the room. Another question, where did you grow up? All right. Interesting. So we've got a majority of folks are joining us from the US. Some 30% so far grew up in Hong Kong. Some 52% grew up in the United States, around 7% grew up in Canada. And we have, I know it's early for those of you who are in Asia right now, so I don't blame you if you're struggling at this hour, but most folks are, do you mind if I share these results? Okay, here we go. Most folks are joining from the West Coast. Got a handful of folks joining from Hong Kong and China, Asia, and yeah, great. Thank you very much. All right. Awesome. New Zealand. Amazing. So I think what we're going to do now is actually give Dr. Gina Tam. We're not related, by the way. We just have the same last name. Give Dr. Tam a chance to share a little bit about the history of Cantonese. So, Dr. Tam, would you like to take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Tam, for that really nice introduction. And I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm so honored to be here, and to be sort of talking to the Stanford community again. So first, I want to just thank SAPAC or SAPAC for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And so I just want to briefly sort of mention my expertise here. So I graduated from Stanford with my doctorate in 2016. My field is modern Chinese history, but my field of research is I'm really interested in the intersection between language and sort of Chinese national identity in China, and looking at that history. And what my book does is it tries to look at that question and that relationship by looking at languages that aren't Mandarin, which tends to be the focus. When we focus on the relationship between language and national identity, we tend to focus on national languages, and China is no exception. And to me, I wanted to sort of explore that from all of these languages that went from sort of being these really prominent parts of local communities, and they still are, but to being framed as something else, something sort of juxtaposed against the national language. So that's where I'm coming from. I took Cantonese with Zheng Luoxi for a year, which was really integral to my writing of this book. I think that it made it possible for me to read materials and to really sort of understand this history in a way that I don't think I could have otherwise. So I'm really fortunate to be a part of this program. Okay, so let me go ahead and jump in. And I realize I should time myself, which I should have been doing earlier. So I want to just start us off by talking a little bit about what Cantonese is, right? Because Cantonese is a bit of an ambiguous term. Generally speaking, when we talk about Cantonese, we are primarily talking about the language that's spoken in Hong Kong and Guangdong, which have some sort of differences, but generally speaking, that's what we mean when we say Cantonese. But it can also the term Cantonese in English can sometimes extend out to include a bunch of neighboring languages and dialects throughout this region of South China. So this area sort of down here, right? And what linguists would call the Yue language family. So for simplicity's sake, we're gonna stick with the definition that's more common, largely because we're here to talk about Cantonese at Stanford, and the Cantonese pedagogy and the Cantonese that we would often learn in any class would be similar to the kinds of pronunciation and syntax that's used in Hong Kong and Guangdong. But I think it's worth emphasizing here that when we're talking about Cantonese and Chinese languages in general, our terms have often multivalent, or they're often multivalent, they're often ambiguous. Sometimes linguists will use terms in a particular way that everyday people will not, and vice versa. And so I just want to sort of highlight the ambiguity there. So as sort of a Southern Chinese language, the bulk of Cantonese speakers live in these southern areas down here of China. But because of the history of the Chinese diaspora, Cantonese is spoken all over the world. People from the area that the country today we call China began moving overseas in the last few centuries, many of whom were from southern provinces of China. So as a result, while the Chinese diaspora is incredibly linguistically diverse, Cantonese is one of the largest spoken languages among overseas Chinese communities. It's spoken by large communities in Malaysia. 15% of Chinese in Singapore speak Cantonese, and actually in sort of your, not my, because I'm in Texas, but in your own backyard, it is the most widely spoken Sinitic language in the Bay Area. I bring this up because I think it's really important when we talk about the significance of Cantonese to the world to recognize that it is not only a language that is authentically central to communities in South China and Hong Kong and Macau, but this language is also authentically central to communities around the globe and a core part of the global history of transnational migration. So as we can see, Cantonese is a really widely spoken language with upwards of 80 million native speakers. So why does this language so often not have the kind of teaching infrastructure and support that we have for so many other languages that often have fewer native speakers? And this isn't just at Stanford, this is around the world and even in China itself. Right. I'd argue that one of those reasons is because Cantonese is often not thought of as a language. It's often thought of as a dialect. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about first why it's called a dialect, and second, why I think that's a problematic term to use. So let's start with the nitty gritty of linguistics. I can answer more questions on this sort of in Q&A if anybody is interested, but I'll try and keep it simple here. So sometimes like people who want to claim that Cantonese is a dialect will defend it on linguistic terms, but these explanations often fall apart when we examine them. So one of the primary tests for calling something a dialect is mutual intelligibility with another language, and Cantonese is not mutually intelligible with Mandarin certainly, but other Sinitic languages as well. It does use this sort of like is tethered to the same script as other Sinitic languages, but script rarely has a bearing on whether or not we consider something a dialect or a language. I mean, English and Spanish use the same script, right? So furthermore, Cantonese has a pretty significant grammatical and phonetic differences from other Chinese languages. So when you sort of look at why we would call something a dialect, these arguments don't really make a lot of like sense, right? So what we're left with is a foundation for calling Cantonese a dialect that's not about sort of linguistics, but about collective identity and politics. Historically, we have often thought that like it was just sort of the sort of general discourse about language is that they are inextricably linked to both ethnicity and nation. And this sort of fact about how we're conceiving of the modern world and what languages are in the modern world compelled really powerful people within China in the last 130 years or so to promote the idea of a singular Chinese language spoken by the Chinese people and representative of the Chinese nation and ethnicity, right? These are often conflated in these conversations. And while sort of one of the most powerful groups here that pushes this line is the government, the current government of the People's Republic of China, it is certainly not limited to you know, government discourse, elites, academics, everyday people all around the world. This is something I see everywhere I go, and even other governments. There was a real push in Singapore to make this claim, right, that Mandarin is the primary Chinese language. And I do want to be clear that when I say that this argument about language and dialect is really much more about sort of ethnicity and nationality and politics, that it's not just sort of me making this up. It's really not difficult to find discourse among officials and academics or everyday people making the claim that languages are spoken by ethnicities or nations, and because Cantonese is not ethnicity and Hong Kong or Guangzhou are not independent nations, Cantonese can't be thought of as a language. So why am I talking about this at all, right? The reason I want to sort of spend a fair amount of my time with you today, which I'm looking at how much time I've spent, is because I think that what we call Cantonese isn't neutral. I think that it necessarily connotes linguistic hierarchies, languages, and like the terms languages and dialects. So when we call Cantonese a dialect, we are confirming this notion that there is a Chinese language, and other Chinese languages are necessarily sort of subsidiary and therefore less important. Moreover, when we presume that there is a Chinese language, we also imply that it can represent all Chinese identities, and that there is a language out there that can represent Chineseness in total. Right? And what that discourse does is it negates the fact that Chinese communities are diverse and multivalent, instead presuming that certain expressions of Chinese identity can and should be hegemonic. So in sum, what I really want to sort of emphasize here is that we need to face head on the political nature of categories like languages and dialects and highlight the broader sociocultural hierarchies and by we, I mean everyday people or like institutions like Stanford, what we subtly reinforce when we say Mandarin is a language that deserves institutional support and Cantonese is a dialect that does not. When Cantonese is the spoken language of so many people and so many diverse communities that are worth including and understanding and engaging with, it matters when we presume their languages are variants, right, or subsidiary. As Chicana cultural studies scholar Gloria Anzaldúa reminds us in her book, La Frontera, Borderlands, my language is my skin, right? And if the goal of learning another language is to open a window into other cultures and ways of looking at the world, this is a diverse community we are leaving out when it's difficult or impossible to learn their language. So I will go ahead and stop there. within time and hand it over to, I believe, Zheng Luoxi is going to speak next.
Actually, we have a little poll before we dive into Zheng Luoxi's presentation. Oh, first, what was your language environment like growing up? And do you consider yourself a native speaker, heritage speaker, student, supporter, but not a speaker? I'm just gonna give folks 1 minute to respond. While we're giving folks a chance to respond, we do have one question for you, Dr. Tam. Does the fact that, this is from my sister, Jody, does the fact that many people identify themselves as Cantonese people make it more of a language than a dialect? Is this more of a social acceptance?
That's a great question. And I see another question that within the first few words, I'm already like very much used to hearing this question. It's probably the most the other question is the one I get asked the most about my book. I'll start with Jody Tam's question. That's a question that I have a really hard time answering, right? Because it's so I'll start with sort of why that often is seen as controversial, right? And that is because in particular, sort of what I know best as the government of the PRC, because that's my field, right, is really invested, I think, in promoting this idea of ethnic unity and national unity and homogeneity. And so the idea that there is a sort of Cantonese people is I think sort of in some ways very threatening to that framework. I'll give one example very briefly is in Hong Kong a few years ago, there was this like educational packet that sent around to secondary schools in Hong Kong that basically said Cantonese can't be called a mother tongue. And their argument was that because according to the UN definition of mother tongues are spoken by ethnicities and Cantonese is not an ethnicity. And like this caused a huge uproar in Hong Kong. There were all these YouTube videos mocking this, right? Like protests with people saying mothers speak Cantonese and therefore it can be a mother tongue. And so to sort of answer your question, I think that one of the things that's really unique and sometimes defies, I guess you could say, comparison globally about Chinese is that it is not common to have people who identify as the same sort of ethnic and national identity speak very different languages, right? In the sense of, and like thinking of them as part of that ethnicity or ethnic identity, right? To think of these as Chinese languages when there's a nation called China, right? And so I don't know if that makes it more or less socially acceptable, but my guess is that that is something that would be threatening to people who are really invested in this idea of one Chinese identity. And that I'd also say that sort of as far as my sort of investment goes in this debate, to me, what I would really like to see is honesty and transparency about the political nature of these categories, because then we can sort of face head on who we erase and whose languages we allow to be less important if we are very honest about the fact that they're political, right? So that's that first question.
If we could hold off the rest
Yes,
of the
I'm
questions.
sorry.
We have a lot of questions coming in and we're really excited about your engagement, but we do want to give you all a chance to hear from Zheng Luoxi, Dr. Sik Lee Dennig. As you can see, we do have most of the folks in this space have Cantonese spoken at home or are native speakers or are heritage speakers. We also have a good number of folks who speak other Sinitic languages and a handful of folks who are not speakers but supporters of us. So thank you for voting and or sharing in the poll. And I think we're going to hand it over to you, Zheng Luoxi.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me see. I'll share my screen. And so I just want to add something about my background. So I grew up in Hong Kong, huh? So but I was very fortunate. I actually grew up in an environment in which many different languages were spoken because my parents actually moved to Hong Kong from Eastern China. So I was exposed to Shanghainese and all these other varieties, that were spoken in Eastern China. So I also, was exposed to Mandarin movies and Mandarin songs before my parents had acquired Cantonese. So I want to emphasize that I'm not against Cantonese. Actually, it's the opposite. Actually, I embrace all languages. But right now, we're talking about Cantonese. And Gina has made many wonderful points about Cantonese. And I think, the problem that we are facing at Stanford right now does have a lot to do with Cantonese being perceived as just a dialect. Okay, so I'm going to start my presentation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Cantonese program at Stanford and the past, the present, and the future. And for the alumni here, you probably can recognize Building 50. So the Cantonese program started here. And then, over the years has migrated to the Knight building. And so let us now take a look at, let me see, how come it's not responding to me, huh? Oop. Okay, so I'm going to show you the major milestones. First of all, the program was started in 1997. So there were two unit sessions of beginning conversational Cantonese that were offered. And then by 2004, the program basically had grown twice in size. So by then we had 4 2-unit conversational courses, but they were in 3 levels. So we have 2 beginning level courses plus an intermediate course, and then plus an advanced course. And then in 2008, I decided to switch one of the beginning sessions to beginning Cantonese for Mandarin speakers, because we started attracting a lot of Mandarin speakers, and they do have needs that are specific to them. So I felt that it would be easier for me to address their needs and also their strengths, because they do bring in knowledge of the Chinese language into the classroom, and they can be helpful too. And then in 2015, I changed the advanced Cantonese class to Cantonese through films, because I was using a lot of movies, news clips, and documentaries. So if I'll take you to this website that 3 of my students have helped me put together. And so we have 4 series: the beginning Cantonese conversational series, and then the beginning Cantonese conversation for Mandarin speakers, and then the intermediate Cantonese conversation, and then the Cantonese through films. If you are interested, you can come and actually listen to my students' production. And let us go back. So if you're interested in what kind of materials I use, now these are the textbooks that I'm using. And of course, I show a lot of movies. So if you're interested, you can email me and ask me about the pros and cons of using these materials. And on top of these, I actually have created a lot of my own materials. Basically, all the materials for the advanced class are created by myself, and also a considerable amount of material for the intermediate class, and also supplement the 2 beginning classes, because it's really difficult to find material that are suitable for American students. And so the Cantonese program, I can say that right from the start, the Cantonese program has involved a lot of activism. So in 1997, when Cantonese was first included in the Chinese curriculum, it was after years of student activism. And then in 2006, a student had to file a request with Stanford. He asked for a 1 5-unit course, beginning course, that included reading and writing. So he started with the language center, and the response was no. So he moved up the ladder, the chain of command, until he finally reached the provost. And the then provost, the provost at that time, actually approved his request. So Cantonese was offered for 1 year that included both reading and writing. Actually, Jamie was one of the students who took that class. And then in 2017, a student, she was a junior at that time. So she had been asking the language center to allow her to use Cantonese to fulfill the Stanford foreign language requirement. So she had been doing that for 3 years. So by the time she reached her junior year, she was really fed up with that. So she wrote actually a very critical article, first of all, explaining the historical significance of Cantonese at Stanford, and then also pointed out, the challenges that she experienced, in trying to use Cantonese, to fulfill the foreign language requirement. She is fluent in Cantonese. She is truly bilingual, and yet Stanford wouldn't let her do that. But after, she interviewed a number of people, wrote the article, finally, the Language Center allowed students to use Cantonese to fulfill the foreign language requirement. So the way it is now, if a student requests to use Cantonese, they will have to take 3 exams. They will have to schedule a Cantonese oral exam with me, and I am an official tester for the government and also for a large organization that specializes in foreign language testing. And then the student has to take a standard written test in standard Chinese written test. So I have been protesting about this. So why can't students write in written Cantonese? Written Cantonese does exist. There is such a thing as written Cantonese. And on top of that, the student will also have to take an online standard Chinese grammar test. So, even though students can use Cantonese to fulfill the foreign language requirement, there are these challenges. There's still these roadblocks ahead. So if you're interested, I can tell you, what are the reasons given. What Language Center says about, having to use standard Chinese. And then now, now we have the Safe Cantonese Stanford movement. So I will let Jamie talk more about that, when it's her turn to talk. And so this is the logo from that movement. And now I will share with you, the students. Let us see who they are. So the biggest group of students are the heritage speakers. And this is from one of the testimonials. And when you read the testimonials, this is quite typical of what you would expect from heritage speakers. They talk about Cantonese as being important because they learn a lot about the Cantonese culture. And also by taking Cantonese, they feel a lot more connected to their roots. So I just want to reiterate something that is very, very apparent to most people, which is language is an inseparable part of our culture. And now I'm going to play a little game with you. So lately, it was just within the last 2 weeks, I was teaching my beginning students terminologies about rooms. So if you look at the first one, in Cantonese, also in English, we call it a bedroom, a room where you sleep. So we call it a sleep room. The second room is actually a maid's room. So it's a domestic worker's room. So we call it a maid's room. And then the third one is a kitchen. So in Cantonese, we call it a kitchen room. And here you see, this is actually a clothes washer, not a dishwasher. So just this picture alone already tells you a lot about Hong Kong culture. Why is it that you don't see a dishwasher here? Instead, you see a clothes washer. So if you're interested, I can explain. And then now this is a house and this is a garage. So in Cantonese, we call a garage a vehicle room. So we use a room for all 4 of these things that have been featured here. So now the game. So there are 2 ways to pronounce the word room. One is fong. This is in the original tone. The other one is fong. And according to a very famous linguist, the change tone, the fong, is used for things that are familiar. So now let's play this game. Let's look at number 1. This is called sleep room. So what do you think? Should I use the change tone or the original tone? So if you like, you can type your answer in the chat box. And what about the domestic workers room? Now let us think about the kitchen. And then last of all, let's think about the garage, which is known as the vehicle room. And here are the answers. So for Fong, actually 1, 2, and 3 are all pronounced as Fong, pronounced with a change tone. So some of you may wonder, oh, why is a maze room, actually a familiar thing in Cantonese, in Hong Kong Cantonese? And the answer is about 5% of the population in Hong Kong are actually domestic workers. Because of them, since 1970s, Hong Kong women have gained independence, meaning they actually are free to work outside of their families. And so at the Gongyan Fong actually is a familiar item in Hong Kong. And then the last one, the garage, the car room, actually we use the original tone for a very simple reason. I actually don't know a single person in Hong Kong who owns a garage. You may be lucky to have a parking spot, a parking space in your high rise, but you will have to be super, super rich in order to have a garage, or you will have to live in a very remote area where land is not as expensive. So this little game itself, already shows you how much you can learn about the culture just through everyday language. And now let us look at the second largest group of students. They are Mandarin speakers. So initially, I would say about 90% of my students were heritage speakers, but now Mandarin speakers actually have grown in number, and now they are about 40% of my students. To many of them, they grew up watching Hong Kong movies, singing Canton pop, so they actually are very interested in popular Cantonese culture. But after they start learning Cantonese, very often they will tell me, wow, I have learned so much more about Chinese culture by learning about Cantonese. So again, I'm going to show you a quick example. So now,
you've got 1 minute left before we
okay,
should sort of...
so I would just talk about this and I'll end. So we just celebrated Chinese New Year. And so you probably are aware that we like to eat seeds during Chinese New Year. So why is it so? Because first of all, seeds symbolize spring, and Chinese New Year, the Chinese New Year celebrates the beginning of spring. But then the kind of seed that you will eat depends on your region. So to the left, these are the watermelon seeds, and they are consumed by Cantonese speakers. In the middle, these are Shanghainese. These are pumpkin seeds. So they are favorites of the Shanghainese people. And then to the right, we have the sunflower seeds. So the point I'm trying to make is, while the Chinese culture has certain universal themes, for example, we all celebrate Chinese New Year, the Chinese New Year, and we all eat seeds. However, the expression of the seed depends on the region. So there is diversity in this, under this universal theme. And also, I just want to very quickly, I'll finish my presentation with this story. One of my Mandarin speaking students actually shared this story with me. And she said, Zheng see, wow, I didn't realize why we always, would buy tangerine trees during Chinese New Year. In my Chinese class, that was the first time I learned that actually tangerines in Cantonese is gut, and it has the same pronunciation as the word for luck or fortune. And that's why we all celebrate with tangerine trees. Okay, so I will stop here, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Zhang Luosi. So I think just to make sure we're moving along, I'm going to jump right into my slides, where I'll be, we've got a poll question. While I pull up my slides, you can answer this poll question. All right. Have you ever taken a Cantonese class? Some 40% grew up in a Cantonese speaking society. Some folks have taken it as classes, at a university, 25 people have for a professional reason. And then, yeah, that's very interesting. Classes in an elementary, middle, or high school. That's impressive to me. At least for the US context, it would be very impressive. So I'm gonna go ahead and start talking with you about the campaign to save Cantonese at Stanford. So we've got some kind of historical background we received from Dr. Tam, and then Joan Lo-Si told us a bit about the program. But what are we doing, and how did this all happen? How did things unfold? I'm gonna walk us through a kind of timeline of events. So in November of 2020, that's when I found out, and several other students and alumni also found out, that the Cantonese program was going to end. And the reason why it was going to end is because Joan Lo-Si is the only Cantonese instructor at Stanford. And so by virtue of not renewing her contract, the entire program was going to end. And so we began organizing on a weekly basis, and we knew that we wanted to draft a petition. And the petition itself, we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the most salient reasons for saving Cantonese at Stanford. And the first one was about Stanford's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. So the provost has launched this IDEAL initiative that, and the university is investing in promoting diversity, equity, inclusion at the university. But there wasn't this sort of deeper look at, well, what about existing programs that contribute to diversity, equity, inclusion and support the Chinese and Asian diaspora at Stanford? Are you really investing in those? So we were saying, our critique was that if you're eliminating the Cantonese language program, you're not living up to those values. The second reason, the second rationale for saving Cantonese at Stanford was the history of Stanford itself. So if you think about how did Leland Stanford get wealthy? How was he even able to endow and establish the university in 1885? He earned his wealth through the railroad empire that he owned. So, and who were the folks who were building the transcontinental railroad that made Leland Stanford so wealthy? These were Chinese railroad workers from Guangdong, Canton province. They were coming from the Pearl River Delta area, and they came to the American West to build this railroad. Many of them died. It was, these were like very dangerous working conditions. And not only that, not only were Cantonese people kind of part of the sort of founding of Stanford's initial wealth, the sort of initial endowment was $30 million, which by today's standards is much more than that, in the billions. But more than that, Cantonese people worked at Stanford. They laid bricks of the buildings at Stanford. They were chefs and cooks and servants and domestic workers for Leland and Jane Stanford. So Cantonese people were there for the beginning of Stanford's history. And then the third our argument is the same one that Dr. Tam kind of mentioned, that Chinese people are a diverse set of people, and the assumption that Mandarin is the only language spoken by Chinese people is not wrong. It's not borne out by the numbers or the facts. And in addition, Stanford has really thrived with its research program because of Cantonese. So Cantonese has supported some really, really cutting edge research on transnational migration and other kind of early migrant communities, that including the Chinese Railroad Workers Project. And then finally, of course, on a more personal note, Stanford's Cantonese language program was changing people's lives since 1997. And, Dr. Dennig failed to mention this, but it took 3 years of student protest and lobbying just to create those first 2 Cantonese classes. And then even to allow Cantonese to fulfill the language requirement for 1 year in 2006, that was my freshman year. That was also a student-led effort. So our petition had these 3 pitches. We want 4 Cantonese classes a quarter. That way you can cover beginning for Mandarin and big speakers and beginning for others, then intermediate and advanced. We want Cantonese to finally fulfill the language requirement, and we want a full-time instructor, not a temporary hourly wage worker, to be leading this program. So we launched the petition. Before we launched the petition, we actually did reach out to university administrators asking for a meeting to kind of get some additional transparency around how this decision was made. And the response that we got was that no language programs have been canceled, and courses will be offered in response to student demands. And this was a very vague promise. There was no kind of explicit promise that Cantonese would even be included the next academic year. And our initial requests for meetings with some administrators were denied. And we wrote back and let them know that it is our position that eliminating the lecturer role for the Cantonese program, it effectively eliminates the Cantonese language program. So when the petition was launched, we quickly kind of reached a global audience, and we didn't really expect it to be as well received as it was. Today, we have over 3,900 signatures. We're reaching 4,000. Many of these individuals have a connection to Stanford, but many also do not. What's also been impressive is that just the sheer number of educators and researchers and also professionals working at API organizations who've co-signed our petition. And we had a couple of more prominent signatories. Alex Lee is a California State Assembly person, and then Celeste Ng, the New York Times bestselling author of Little Fires Everywhere. She also tweeted about our campaign and signed it. So we have some really great leaders in the Asian American and API communities who are supporting our campaign. In addition, we have some people who are direct descendants of Cantonese railroad workers who have signed our petition, and one direct descendant of a Cantonese cook who worked in the early Stanford dorms in the early 1900s. So after our petition was launched, the universities kind of changed course. Originally, 0 courses were going to be offered by the university. And then because of the outpouring of support, including by you folks in this room who signed the petition, shared it with folks, spread the word, the university was now making this more minimal offer. They were going to offer 2 classes, but it would still be taught by an hourly instructor. But in January, that was also the first time we finally had a meeting with a university administrator. So progress was being made in response because of the petition. From there, we started to kind of get some media attention, both at the local and national levels, but also global media coverage around our campaign. And that has been very exciting to see that we're really spreading the word and trying to get people aware of what's happening at Stanford and why it's relevant to the global community. So, now you're probably wondering, well, what happens now? What's next, right? Our plan, our movement is starting to shift gears. We're trying to figure out it's not just about a Cantonese program barely able to survive. What we want is for Cantonese to truly thrive at Stanford. And for a program to truly thrive, it needs appropriate investment. So we're interested in pursuing this proposal that we're calling the Cantonese Studies Initiative. And this initiative has 2 parts. The first is an endowed full-time benefits eligible lecture position, to lead the Cantonese program. And this would allow the program to exist in perpetuity, basically. That is, it would no longer be subject to the sort of conditions of like COVID-19, future budget cuts, any other. We want to protect the Cantonese language program from any further disruptions. And we don't want students to have to lose out on this opportunity to gain proficiency in what for many folks for many folks is a heritage language. The second piece is programming to support the study of Cantonese history, culture, and peoples at Stanford. We really want to kind of amplify the work that's already happening at Stanford around the Cantonese diaspora, and kind of invest in creating why not, given Stanford's unique connection to Cantonese people, Cantonese communities, why not have Stanford be a thriving epicenter for research on Cantonese people, history, cultures, and languages? So I would say that the work we're trying to do has this global connection because we really do want to promote a more pluralistic understanding of Chinese diaspora. And we want to convey how important the language is to build ties in Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Macau, Guangdong. And what we're also talking about is this broader problem of ethnic minority languages facing risk of erasure. Our campaign is not anti any language. We're pro every language. And we really want to preserve minority languages and counter widespread monolingualism. We think that Cantonese really represents a lot of, like what we're doing right now represents a lot of the same challenges that other languages are facing around the world. And we have this, our position is that the best future we can create is one where everyone can speak in a variety of languages, including their mother tongues. As for community impact, we have countless testimonials from people who've written in, and it's many of them very moving testimonials explaining how Cantonese changed their lives. But many students of Zheng Lo have also gone on to serve Cantonese communities as well. So, you know, Mark Liu wrote a testimonial talking about his over decades worth of community work that he's done in Chinatown, serving these communities and providing them help with housing, benefits, and workers' rights issues. Laura Ng and Hantian Zhang have both done research where Cantonese has played a really important role in allowing them to do that. Research on Cantonese migrants and also research on Hong Kong. And then Lena Yin, we have this great photo here. She is in medical training, and she has talked about how vital Cantonese has been for speaking with patients. And you're talking about the Greater Bay Area and monolingual Chinese speakers, you're talking about Cantonese speakers. So that's been the community impact. I also want to close with sharing a little bit about the personal impact that the Cantonese program has had in my life. You know, this bottom right photo is a photo from a field trip that the Cantonese language program went on to San Francisco, Chinatown, and we learned a lot of really fascinating history. This was our sort of class outing. And then in the top photo, that's me actually, after taking 2 or 3 years of Cantonese with Zheng Lo, I actually went to CUHK, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and spent a summer there to further my language study. And those are my classmates when I was studying abroad at CUHK. And then this is the photo on the bottom is me with Zheng Lo during a recent kind of reunion. And then the one on the left is very important to me. That's my popo, my grandmother. Because of this language program, I've been able to really build my relationship with her and there's no way that would have been possible if it weren't for the classes that I took at Stanford. So some of you are probably wondering, okay, well, how can I help? How can I be part of this movement to save Cantonese? First, we invite you to check out our website, savecantonese.org. And from there, if you have skills, like brain-powered networks, creative thinking that you want to give to this campaign, you can join our team. You can join Team Cantonese as a volunteer. We organize over Slack. We have weekly virtual meetings, and we really encourage you to follow us on social media and to share our content. I think in order to make the Cantonese Studies Initiative a reality, we need to generate broader interest, and we need to keep this alive. We have to keep the message alive over the next few months. And that's really challenging for a campaign. How do you keep a campaign alive for the long run? So if you're willing to engage with us on social media, that would be a huge help. Please spread the word about our campaign and what we're trying to accomplish and why it's relevant to the broader global Chinese diaspora. If you have existing connections, share our story with them. And if you have existing connections with Stanford, please talk to your Stanford connections about our efforts, whether that's like Stanford alumni, Stanford faculty, Stanford administrators, or trustees. Please talk to them about what we're doing and voice your support. Finally, if you have some creative skills in like producing media content, we would love to have a few more volunteers who could really help us expand in that direction. So please check out our website. We also have a one-page flyer called that's like at tinyurl.com/Save Cantonese Flyer. It's a one-page description of our plans with the Cantonese Studies Initiative, and please feel free to share that widely. So I think I'm going to stop and then get to questions since we only have a few more minutes. We've got a lot of them, so let's go back a bit. I
love that first one, and I thought that others would have even perhaps as much, if not more, thoughts on this, because I think it's a really important one. So I've been answering some of them through chat, but I thought that was one that the first one. Sorry, I just sort of jumped in, but
no, go ahead. So one question is, aside from Cantonese being taught at Stanford, how can we support Cantonese language learning in our communities? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think about this a lot actually, because I think, as Jamie said really beautifully, sort of like language, and I don't even like the word language death because it makes it sound like it's passive, right? Then that, in fact, when languages sort of become less important, it's because we do that. Like we as communities create structures that lead to sort of like the active oppression and silence surrounding. I mean, languages need support; they need infrastructure, and what that looks like, I think, varies from community to community. And what I'd love to see is more discussions like this in local sort of Chinese schools and Chinese centers. Although this is something I know a lot less about. This is something that like sort of supporting language education in Hong Kong. I wish I had really concrete suggestions here, but I think that this is a big sort of question and problem that I'd love to hear others sort of jump in on.
May I share my slides? Yes, in response to that question, huh? Yeah. Okay. So I want to say something, which is since the umbrella movement, I really, can see that there has been a revitalization of Cantonese, both in Hong Kong and in, overseas communities. For example, Fremont Unified School District actually now allows students to use Cantonese to fulfill their foreign language requirement. They actually will, count them as credit for taking, a foreign language. So I actually helped a Sunday school that offers Cantonese instruction to meet the requirement by the school district. So there are a lot of things you can do. There really have been a lot more resources on the internet too. So if you want to email me, I can direct you to some of the resources. And also, I want to really highlight the publication of the first literary journal in Cantonese. It really is a very powerful journal. So so there just have been so much more going on, and Cantonese courses, are being offered for the first time at Berkeley. They used to be taught by students as decal classes, but now they are actually, part of the Chinese curriculum. And also, the community, huh? So I just want to share this very quickly with you. My students are helping me build up this website, and we call it the Cantonese community. So it's very easy to remember, just Cantonese-community.github.io. And I want to put my materials on the website. Right now on the internet, you can find a lot of materials for vocabulary building, basic things, or a lot of video clips, but there are no structures, there are no lessons, being built around them. So I am going to put a lot of my own materials here. And on top of that, I'm also going to go through, what's on the internet and provide them. So if so hopefully this is, this will help. Oh, sorry. Oops. Yes, yes.
Thank
So this is one of the things. Yes.
Great. So we've got a few more questions that are in the Q&A. One of them was, who decided to end Cantonese instruction at Stanford? So one thing that has been a problem, I would say, throughout the campaign, and still is a problem now, is the general lack of transparency around how the decision was made. We reached out wanting more information about how the decision was made, whether the decision was based purely on enrollment numbers or not. And we believe that even though enrollment was kind of used, low enrollment was kind of used as an argument, Cantonese enrollment actually performs better than many other languages that are more institutionally supported. And so we feel that, I think there was some general ignorance on the decision, like the person probably just did not see the unique value of Cantonese at Stanford. And I can't point to any particular individual. I wasn't in the room when these decisions were made, but we did ask for more transparency, and we haven't really received as much as we think we deserve.
I can answer the question. It's the director of the language center. So Stanford is very decentralized. So the provost is the budgetary officer. And then, she tells the colleges and the departments, how much, she allocates the funding. And then the humanities and sciences tell the programs under them, how much they have to cut. But then it's up to each department and program to make, their own decisions. So the decision to cut comes from the director of the language center. And that's probably why she has refused to meet with you guys. And why would she make a decision like this? It is because of what Gina, has talked about. To her, it just, disposable. It's just a dialect.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been also quite troubling about the decision-making process from the Stanford side is that the community was not involved or consulted around this decision. Zheng Luoxi did not get to weigh in on how to save the program before a decision was announced, and students were not involved or their voices not included. And even beyond that, Asian voices were not included. Chinese voices were not included in the decision-making process. The people who've been making these decisions, who are in these administrative roles, are all white. And so the sort of lack of transparency and then the sort of general unwillingness to involve proactively the communities that would be affected by this decision, I think that's part of what made it so hurtful. So I think another question was, let's see, I believe, sorry. Oh, okay. Someone has mentioned that, there aren't decent Cantonese programs for kids. And that's also a big problem for sort of helping to keep the language alive. I will even say that I grew up and I went to Chinese school every Saturday to learn Mandarin, despite the fact that not a single member of my family speaks Mandarin. And I think there's another comment in here about, how can we convince Hong Kong immigrants to treat Cantonese as a language that's important to identity? And that's definitely a challenge that I've experienced, where I was sort of forced to learn Mandarin, even though my interest was to learn Cantonese. And honestly, if I wasn't at Stanford, I don't know that I would know Cantonese. It was because I got to Stanford that I finally had an opportunity to learn the language I wanted to learn and speak with my relatives. So I think that's a complex question around how do we convince people that Cantonese is a language worth learning. If either of you want to comment on that.
Yeah, it's something. This is another one of those things where I feel sort of really frustrated, and as a historian, I think it's important that we take these questions seriously, but one of the sort of problems of being a historian is that when it comes to sort of concrete policy, I often sort of fall flat on this. But to me, I think that events like this, that even just sort of raise the idea that it's possible to be to have a particular identity that's really meaningful to people, right? It's meaningful to be Chinese, that can be diverse, that can be multivalent, and that there aren't hierarchies within these kinds of identities, and that there are societies that are successfully terrifically multilingual and don't necessarily. I think there's a fear sometimes that this can sort of like rip things apart, right? And that, but it's difficult, right? When like the power dynamics are sort of against, I think, against sort of like emphasizing this kind of diversity. There has to be a will for it, and education is part of that, but also challenging power dynamics is part of that too. I know that's really vague. I wish I had a better answer, but that's sort of where my thinking is at this point.
We have an important question in the Q&A that I want to get to. How can we donate to Cantonese at Stanford? And another anonymous attendee says, how does funding play into preserving the program? Even the millions the athletics program raised couldn't save the teams that were cut. So this is a great question. So, despite the fact that we're not involved in any fundraising efforts, the Office of Development at Stanford is currently assessing donor interest in this area. We consider this to be a positive development, that they're looking for ways to fund a Cantonese program. And I think that's encouraging. We really wish that we were allowed to be more involved in that process. Again, there are ways in which Stanford works that like kind of by design keep out the voices of communities like ours, and that's something we wish was very different. But we do think this is good news, and the fact that the Office of Development is taking some time and effort to look into assessing donor interest is a good thing for us. And I think it is absolutely essential that we identify, or the Office of Development identifies donors or major donors who are interested in endowing this program and supporting the Cantonese Studies Initiative if we want the program to continue. So funding absolutely plays an essential role. But as for how to donate to Cantonese at Stanford, we're currently a volunteer-run effort, and you know, donating your skills, your time, your expertise, your brain power would be fabulous. We currently don't have a fund that we use, but please reach out to us. I'm sure we can find a way to use a donation if that's something that you're willing to do. So thank you for asking that question. We're over time, and I just want to make sure that we're respecting everyone's time. People who, you know, maybe have plans at 9 o'clock, I'm happy to stick around and continue answering questions. But, you know, Dr. Tam, if you need to leave, or Kevin, oh, we're not over time? Does this run until 9:30?
Until 9:30, yeah.
Oh my goodness, this is fabulous. I had no idea. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and answer some more of these questions because they keep coming in. Okay, so with rapidly increasing levels of political pressure being placed on Hong Kong, is there any evidence of a campaign to subvert teaching of Cantonese in overseas communities? Stanford has a Confucius Institute. Does this leave the university vulnerable to such manipulation? So as far as the decision that went into, the decision to end Zheng Luoxi's contract, Zheng Luoxi was not the only person who was affected by COVID-19 budget cuts. Many languages were affected, and Cantonese was actually not the only one. For example, Vietnamese and Tagalog were also affected, and also some Northern European languages were affected by budget cuts. So, to my knowledge, I think the decision was based out of ignorance, and ignorance about the importance of Cantonese, and ignorance about how vital it was to the Stanford community. And so I can't speak to any other sort of behind the scenes campaigns, but that is my general impression.
I can speak a little bit broadly here, because I don't know much about Stanford or even really much about overseas, but I do know a bit about what's happening in China, and I think that matters too, right? And so what I see happening when it comes to Chinese languages in particular, right? Because China also has a lot of non-Chinese languages that are spoken throughout the country, is that so there's not a lot of opportunities to learn these in schools, right? Like schools are very Mandarin focused. There are spaces for sort of entertainment in local languages, Cantonese being one of them, but they're limited. And they often sort of like an example is that the app Douyin, which is I think like TikTok. Sorry, I'm a little old when it comes to apps, but that they started censoring videos in Cantonese. Largely because they didn't have the infrastructure to censor them. Like you have to put everything through a sort of online censor, and you need to have infrastructure of people who speak Cantonese who can say like, is this politically sensitive or not? But that infrastructural stuff matters, even if their explanation isn't, we're not trying to censor this language in particular, that the infrastructure to be able to make it a part of public life, that stuff kind of matters. So I don't know specifically of any evidence of trying to subvert the teaching of other Chinese languages, or even sort of non-Chinese languages that are spoken within China, like Tibetan. I don't know of that specifically, but I also know that the rhetoric of devaluing other languages as not being languages, of being less important, and the huge push for Mandarin, because even if they don't have to say like we're devaluing Cantonese, by pumping so much money and emphasis into Mandarin and calling it just Chinese, that that has an effect, and that matters, and that this is something we should be wary of even before, or even if like sort of the specific subversion isn't happening. So that's, I do think, I feel really sort of torn about things like Confucius Institutes, because I live in a city where there would be no money to teach any Chinese languages if it weren't for stuff like that. We don't have one at my university, but a neighboring one does, and has a Confucius Institute. And as Jamie said, I think we should be pro all languages and not anti-Mandarin, right? But money does matter, and so I think that this sort of just the immense amounts of power to shape what the infrastructure of language learning abroad is something, it's important, and I think that that's something we should be aware of.
We have a quick comment related to the previous question from Gina Tam. Thank you for this comment. Most universities and nonprofits, you can donate through Stanford and specifically ask that funds be allocated to a particular program. For example, Dan donates directly to GSE and for scholarships. And so if you are interested, or you know someone who's interested in making a gift to Stanford that would go towards a Cantonese program, please reach out to Stanford's development office, and we're happy to help you or other people figure out how to do that. But it's important that Stanford hears it directly from the donor and not from us. So if you're interested in or know people who might be supportive of kind of helping to fund a future Cantonese program, please communicate that desire to the Office of Development. It's so important that the Office of Development or the Stanford hears it directly from potential donors and not from us, because what that says is that there's broader interest, and it's not just sort of it's not like a group of people are organizing a campaign, but there are people in the community who are interested in giving. So definitely, that's a great response. Thank you, Dan, for chiming in with that. A couple more questions. Do any of the panelists know about the status of Cantonese or non-Mandarin language programs across higher education in North America? So maybe Zheng Lo-Si, you can comment on that.
Okay, let me see. I have prepared a slide. Let me see if I can share that with you. Yes, unfortunately, yes, I'll share the slide with you. Oh, wait. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. So, so you can see this. So basically from 2009 to 2016, you can see that the enrollment, college enrollment in different languages have dropped substantially. And even for Stanford's Language Center, they have lost about 30% of the enrollment since the financial crisis. And on top of that, let's take a look at this slide too. Again, since the financial crisis, notice how our enrollment in engineering has increased, has basically doubled since 2008. And at one point, it was even, a little bit, it was 50% of the undergraduate enrollment. So we are fighting, these trends. So what should we do? So the question is, there is a lot to do. And I hope Stanford is sensitive about this. For example, UCLA just announced that they have established a new department. So they're going to put different European languages together, and they're going to focus on transcultural studies. So they are going to tie, for example, colonialism with the European languages. So I think that was actually part of the reason I proposed a Cantonese Studies Initiative, because I think we do need to tie ourselves to other issues that are relevant to our students. We're not just teaching, a foreign language. We need to broaden the curriculum. We need to have this transcultural perspective. And also, if among the audience, we have people who know how to do technology. We need more interactive technology in language learning, so that learners can have immediate feedback. Jamie, how much more how much? Yeah, let me see. Let me stop here.
I think we have, let's see if we can get to a few more questions.
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
So Phi Lang asks, hello, thank you to the panel. I'm wondering if someone could provide a quick working definition for heritage speaker.
That's a very good question. Even experts don't agree on that definition. So it can be very broad. It can be anyone, whose family doesn't speak English in the United States context. So to someone, who has some knowledge of the language, to someone who is quite fluent in the language. So my definition is someone who comes from a household in which a non-English language is spoken. And, there has been a lot more emphasis on studying heritage language learners, language development. So what we have found is, even if you were just a passive listener when you were a little child growing up, that passive exposure will help you down the road. So among my heritage speakers, one thing that stands out is their pronunciation is usually a lot better than someone who has never been exposed to the language before. They will also be able to recognize some of the very colloquial expressions used around, in their families. Yeah, so I hope that satisfies the person who asked the question.
Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
also received a question from Elliot. I would imagine that if there were some significant donors to Stanford who would support the teaching of Cantonese, this program would gain a bigger hearing and support. I would suggest you create a GoFundMe page and really use social media to reach out to all former alum who are primarily Cantonese speakers or bilingual speakers who want to see Cantonese preserved at Stanford, and bring it to the attention of the Chinese or Chinese American SF Bay Area community.
So actually, Jamie, may I answer that question?
Sure.
So that was what I thought of right away. Actually, so back in November, I already reached out to the Department of Development, and they insisted that I did not reach out to any potential donors. They said even if I manage to raise money, Stanford may not accept the money, especially if the money is from overseas. And on top of that, even if we want to set up an endowment fund, so an endowment fund starts at 100,000. So, it's not a lot of money. So I said, I can set up an endowment fund, I can set up a fund, try to raise money by small donors. And no, you cannot do that. So for an endowment fund, 50% of the fund had to come from a very small number of donors, like 4 or 5. And on top of that, so the latest, so I've been working with the Department of Development, and the latest news. So they agree on, like what Jamie said, so they finally agree on looking into potential donor interest. And I share a list of names that I thought they should look into with them. But then they also said that it may take 2 years or longer to set up the large endowment. So I said, what about in the meantime, let us set up an expendable fund under East Asian languages and cultures. The Language Center itself doesn't have any funds that you can donate into. But the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures has been extremely supportive, and they have an existing fund. So it's very easy to set up a small fund underneath their existing fund. But you cannot believe the response that I got from a senior associate dean. Absolutely not. Yes, he said absolutely not. Yes.
I mean, many of you, or maybe some of you, are aware of the campaign to save Stanford sports. They raised $40 million and Stanford won't accept it. So we're kind of trying to be aware that even if we fundraise the money, Stanford can outright refuse to accept it. If the funds are not received in a very particular way. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense to us. And if there's a community outpouring of support, why not embrace it? But I think we are learning a bit from like what other campaigns have tried to do. And also, we're receiving very direct advice not to go out and do our own fundraising. I think our job is to kind of, at this point, our campaign is shifting towards taking public actions that create the conditions for donor interest. But we cannot, I think if we were to sort of outright solicit for donations, Stanford can just not accept any of the funds. And that obviously these decisions are made by people in positions of power without consultation. I think this is like a broader problem where there's sort of community voices are not being heard or included, and sometimes community dollars are not even desired. But I think what we're trying to do is figure out how to secure a future for Cantonese at Stanford. And to some extent, we have to kind of allow Stanford to work the way that it works, while also doing our part to create the conditions for all of those efforts to succeed.
Yes, so may I add, but I do want to encourage, any listeners out there to reach out to development and express your interest, because then you are helping us put pressure on Stanford. But they have promised to take the temperature of potential donors, right? But if they're also hearing from the community, then they know that this is serious. Yeah, so I think, just like Jamie is putting, Jamie and other volunteers are also keeping up the publicity campaign, by reaching out to, journals and newspapers. Yeah, so I hope, any volunteers if they can reach out to the development, that would be wonderful.
And if you're very interested in learning more about the sort of like behind the scenes work that we're doing on the campaign and the things that we're learning about how an elite institution like Stanford works, you are totally welcome to join Team Cantonese as a volunteer. We have conversations about this sort of stuff, and we welcome you regardless of your Stanford connection to be part of this broader movement. Now, speaking of the broader movement, would Stanford's Cantonese program consider organizing, collaborating with other local or national universities? We also have a couple of other questions related to Cantonese language education broadly. Have you thought about trying to create an online class for non-Stanford students? Because I would sign up. That's from Kenneth Hong. And then other people who are asking, is there a way to connect folks in this call who have children and kind of create some Cantonese language connections? And I think these are all really great questions. Journalist, if you want to answer.
Yes, please email me. I have helped multiple parents connect with each other and also connect with communities or schools or groups, that are interested in helping their young children learn Cantonese. And also, that is actually my goal. First of all, I want to establish a Cantonese club at Stanford, create language communities, not just for Cantonese, even say Toy San Hua. The way I'm talking about Cantonese, I'm talking about like Hong Kong Cantonese. Yeah, but also, Shanghainese and so on. Also want to support other clubs. And, I want to start with small, and then I want to be able to form the Cantonese Alliance of the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we can, move even to the whole North America, so a step at a time. So if you are interested, please email me. I would love to hear from you.
We also got another question, about remote or distance learning around
yes.
language.
That is thank you. Yes, thank you. I forgot. That is what I'm trying to do too with this website. So I will, I'll put the materials there, and also start offering classes. Can be in small groups, recruiting native speakers to help. So the internet has made it possible now. So some tutors may charge a small sum of money, but you'll be surprised at how little, because a lot of them are doing this because they want to preserve the language. So we'll sort these things out. If you're interested, please email me. We'll form a team. We'll start working on it, figuring how to make things work.
Yeah, I think there's still questions that are coming in. How can we make Cantonese curriculum a language option in other institutions, as in the UCs and CSUs? And another Ray Falk asks, do other schools in the States have similar situations? So there seems to be interest in how exactly you might go about creating Cantonese programs. We're trying to save one from being eliminated, but if anyone on the panel has thoughts about how to kind of support I would say that my feedback is that student lobbying and activism has to be part of it. I think given the history of Stanford's Cantonese program, both its sort of like its activism around creating the program and then activism to save the program today has always been because the community has worked together to put pressure on institutions so that they will create a program like this. But if folks have, if Dr. Dennig or Dr. Tam, if you have any reactions to that.
Yeah, also I think informing the community why Cantonese is important, or for that matter, other languages. So the volunteers are doing a wonderful job by going, to the media. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we maybe have time for one more question. Dylan asks, Leland Stanford obviously had a major role in the arrival of Cantonese, Cantonese speakers to U.S. via his railroad enterprise, but he also expressed overtly racist opinions of Chinese immigrants in his capacity as governor of California, calling them, quote, an inferior race and warning of their deleterious influence. How has the university failed to address or addressed Stanford's role in the rise of xenophobic attitudes in America, especially given the current surge of anti-Asian sentiment in the U.S.? It seems the university has a unique responsibility to support Cantonese speaking community in the present era. It's funny because I think a lot of words have been said to support Chinese communities, where leadership will say, we support diversity and inclusion, we denounce all forms of hatred, but it's not really communicated in dollars. So I would say that, has the university tried to address the rise of xenophobia? They've done so in symbolic terms by kind of speaking. For example, the provost gave a speech honoring Chinese railroad workers last year, saying, saying like explicitly that Chinese railroad workers from Guangdong province were essential to the creating of the university. But that decision was not backed up by dollars. So I think we're kind of nearing the end of this panel, and to those of you whose answers we didn't get to today, we're very sorry. But maybe we can stick around a little bit past the panels if there's still interest. But still, we have some last remarks from any of our panelists. Dr. Dennig or Dr. Tam, do you have anything you'd like to say? And then after the three of us have our closing remarks, Emily Song from SAPAC has some closing remarks as well.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for attending the event. It really means a lot to us. So I hope you can get involved, and we'll make it happen. I'm very optimistic about the future of Cantonese.
Yeah, I also just want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this, for SAPAC, and thank you to Zheng Luoxi and everyone and for all of you for showing up. I mean, one of the things that I think that grassroots activism and people caring about their communities really matters, and so it's really heartening to see all the people here who are really invested in language protection and creating the structures to make sure for language survival. So yeah.
I think my closing remarks will be 加油. Thank you for your support. Emily, did you want to chime in?
Hi, my name is Emily Song. I'm the events committee chair on SAPAC. We're so honored to create a space for everyone to discuss this. And I also took 4 years of Cantonese at Stanford with Zhang Luoxi, so I use Cantonese for my work every day, and very grateful for the opportunity. And I hope future generations will have similar opportunities to do that at Stanford as well. Just want to say thank you. And for everyone who has not signed up to be a SAPAC member yet, go to sapaac.org, SAPAAC.org. As long as you've been at Stanford for 3 quarters, you qualify to be an alumna or So go to our website. It's a free membership. So we have a ton of events like this. If you're interested in Asian American culture and advocacy, we have an amazing lineup of events coming up. So please sign up on sapac.org. And a huge shout out to all the work that Jamie and Zhang Oxi have put together, and your army of volunteers who have been helping with this initiative. A quick shout out to Kevin Su, who has been helping us run this event as well. So thank you. If you we'll give your time back on a Saturday, but if you would like to say a quick hi and thank you to Zhang Oxi, she will hang out for a few seconds to say hi to her students and former students. This will become an informal space for everyone to chat. Thank you all.
So that brings our event to a close. I also found it personally moving how many people came here, were engaged and listening and asking questions. Our campaign has made a pretty remarkable amount of progress in only a couple of months of even existing, and it's only because of supporters like you. So thank you for doing your part to save Cantonese. Don't forget to use the hashtag, follow us on social media, savecantonese.org, join us. So thank you again.